Lord, hear my prayer. Listen to my cry for help. So many troubles have befallen me. I'm like all others who are about to die. My strength
In a gloomy cell at Fremantle Prison in Western Australia, a serial killer condemned to death makes one final horrifying confession.
Eric, is there anything you wish to say?
You serious, Reverend?
Swear on the Bible for absolution, son.
He declares before God that he's also guilty of 2 more murders.
I swear by Almighty God that I killed Rosemary Anderson and Julian Brewer.
God have mercy on your soul.
Murders for which 2 other men have already been convicted and jailed.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come.
At precisely 8 a.m. on October the 26th, 1964, the trapdoor snaps open and one of Australia's most prolific serial killers drops to his death. Outside, a lone protester holds a candlelight vigil as the murderer becomes the last man to be hanged in Western Australia. Perth, capital of Western Australia, where the Swan River meets the Indian Ocean and rolling waves break onto sweeping golden beaches. In the 1980s, brash and fearless entrepreneurs built lavish mansions and mighty skyscrapers and moored their sleek yachts in sparkling new marinas. But before all this, there was a time in the early 1960s when this was a quiet and sleepy town. Doors were unlocked and windows were left open at night to catch the evening breeze, a refreshing zephyr from the ocean, known locally as the Fremantle Doctor.
Perth at the time was about the size of Hobart now, population of 500,000. It was very unsophisticated and very small, very close in. There were rural paddocks, no street lights.
Certainly in the 1950s, early 1960s, it was just a big country town, very quiet. People had no concept of a need for security. People would leave their doors open when they went out, leave their keys in their car. They would sleep on the veranda of their house or the front lawn without any fear.
And then in the late 1950s, Perth's trusting way of life slowly begins to change. By 1958, it's an increase in burglaries, followed by a sudden rise in car thefts. And police start getting more and more reports of prowlers and the theft of underwear from clotheslines. Then, the shock of sudden, senseless murder. It's 2:30 a.m., the 29th of January, 1959. 33-year-old divorcee Penina Berkman lies sleeping in her South Perth apartment. A burglar, armed with a stolen diving knife, has crept in and is prowling towards the bedroom. Suddenly, Penina wakes to find an intruder leaning over her. He panics and grabs at her. she rips down the side of the man's face with her nails. Unable to control her, the intruder plunges a knife into her face. And then stabs her again, this time in her heart. As Penina takes her last breaths, her murderer flees into the night. Detectives search the area and interview neighbours, including Joan Evans.
And some moans. And I said to my husband, I woke my husband up. I said, I'm frightened, I've just heard a horrible scream. And they said, oh, go back to sleep, you've had a dream. And that was as much as I got out of him. Then I heard a car drive away. I heard a milkman around, milk bottles rattling, and I heard a car drive away, but I don't think it was the milkman's vehicle. I think it was someone else's. But I couldn't tell the police what kind of a car it was.
Despite an intense investigation which turns up nothing, police have no way of knowing that this is just the first in a series of terrible crimes, all the act of one man, whose random killings will turn Perth into a city of fear. Just before midnight on Australia Day 1963, poultry shop owner Nick August and hotel barmaid Rowena Reeves park in a suburban street at North Cottesloe.
Like a drink?
Oh, I'd love one, thank you.
Why not? We've had a great dinner.
It was beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, Vic and Beryl are nice.
There you had initially a man and a woman sitting in a car. I think it was Eric Street from memory, the straight road that goes down towards the ocean, and they were having a quiet drink, and they happened to just sight through towards the back of the car a person watching.
Jesus. Nick, there's a guy out there watching us.
Probably just walking home from the pub. Hey.
How are the races?
Well, I won. That's what the
Oh,
show is.
congratulations. Nick,
Sorry.
he's still out there. He's still out there.
Piss off, you bastard!
Nick, he's got a gun!
I saw him raise the gun. Well, when I saw him raise the gun, he's not going to raise the gun to wang us over the head with it. I knew he's going to shoot it, because I said, oh, he's going to shoot.
Nick, he's got a gun! He's got a gun!
And with that, I swiped Nick's head down.
Jesus!
A bullet hits Nick first, slicing his neck open, and then smashing into Rowena's wrist.
Blood was spurting from his neck, from her wrist. She was screaming, she was fainting. They didn't know what was going on, but he managed to collect his wits and drove off.
As he speeds away, Nick sees the gunman line up and take another shot.
But they managed to drive off in shock and bleeding and screaming, managed to make their way to Fremantle Hospital, where they were treated in emergency.
Because it went through there and they didn't come out till over here somewhere.
He's got a gun! He's got a gun!
So it went right through my arm. But the doctor took the bullet out. It was all a shrapnel in my. I couldn't be able to use my arm for days, weeks, because of the shrapnel went into the whole arm.
Thwarted in his attempt to kill, the gunman goes looking for other victims. Clutching his weapon, he walks back to nearby Broome Street towards his stolen car. Then, noticing an apartment balcony door open, he climbs some stairs and jumps over a railing. He finds 29-year-old accountant and volunteer lifesaver Brian Weir asleep. From a metre away, the killer lifts the rifle and shoots him in the head. The impact of the shot throws Brian into the air. He falls back across the bed with his head hanging down and his blood dripping onto the floor.
Amazingly, that shot didn't kill him. He survived, they think, because the bullet, he reared up and fell with his head dangling from the bed. So maybe the blood rushed out instead of down into his lungs. We don't know how he managed to live, but he lived.
The gunman walks swiftly to his stolen car and drives away. At nearby Nedlands, a fashionable suburb along the Stirling Highway, he pulls over and sets off again on foot into the night. He's looking for someone, anyone to kill. He creeps around the side and into the backyard of a house in Vincent Street. Here he finds 19-year-old student John Sturkey sleeping on the back veranda, escaping the summer heat. The killer raises his gun and slowly takes aim at the sleeping figure. He fires at point-blank range into the young man's skull, then quickly sneaks away into the darkness. 30 minutes later, a housemate is woken by gurgling noises and finds John Sturkey lying mortally wounded. He's rushed to Royal Perth Hospital, where he's declared dead on arrival. But the killings are not over yet. Selecting a nearby house, he walks up the driveway to the front door and, finding it locked, rings the bell. And then backs into the shadows. This time, he'll wait for his victim to come to him. A light comes on.
Hello?
A bleary-eyed 54-year-old George Ormond Walmsley opens the door. A single shot rings out. The gunman disappears again into the night.
He slumped over the doorstep. His wife and daughter asleep in the house. Heard it, saw it, screamed, called the ambulance. He was quickly taken to hospital alive. Surgeons worked on George Walmsley for an hour trying to save him, but he died on the operating table an hour later.
The gunman drives his stolen car to the Narrows Bridge and dumps his rifle into the Swan River. He then dumps the stolen car and returns to his home as if nothing has happened. The following day, Brian Weir fails to turn up for training with the Swanbourne Nedlands Surf Lifesaving Club. His teammate, Len Barth, goes looking for him.
I heard him before I saw him. He was making a sort of snoring sound, sort of trying to breathe, I suppose. And I forget how I got in now. And there he was lying across the bed, threshing with blood everywhere.
He was murdered that night, but he lived virtually as a vegetable for another 3 years.
But he was in a coma for the first 6 months. And every time the phone rang, you just were so worried because you knew that might have been saying, well, sorry, he's, died, he's deceased.
So when he eventually died of his injuries, his brother, who loved him dearly, his brother Colin loved him dearly, cared for him. When the news came through he'd died, it was just thank God for that.
On Sunday morning, Perth wakes up to the news that a crazed gunman has murdered 2 citizens in cold blood and wounded 3 more. In 1963, such a crime spree is unprecedented in this city. As details emerge about the random nature of the attacks, there's a terrible realisation that anyone, anywhere in Perth, could be the next target. January 1963, a killer is at large, stalking at night in the suburban streets of Perth, killing people at random while they sleep. Police ballistic experts establish that the killing of 2 people and the wounding of 3 others in a pre-dawn shooting spree is all the work of the same madman. The city is gripped by fear. Anyone could be next. Doors are bolted, windows locked, and people stay at home, dreading the night.
People were going to bed with rifles beside their bed, baseball bats, and they were immediately reporting any incident, and we were on patrol trying to respond to these incidents. Even when you got there, the people would not open the door, even though they'd called the police, but they wouldn't believe that you were the police.
Perth changed forever on that Australia Day long weekend. We made fortresses of our houses, we locked doors and windows, nobody went out at night. It was a sweltering summer, pre-air conditioning, people were getting boils.
Who's there?
With only a few bullets and no motives, there are no solid leads for police to follow.
Cheers.
Cheers.
There are only 2 witnesses, the first victims, Nick August and Rowena Reeves.
Piss off, you bastard.
Nick, he's got a gun! He's got a gun! Get down!
In desperation, police set up a reenactment of the shooting.
A police constable, who later was promoted to police commissioner, had to stand there holding a mop to be the rifle. They put this fellow Nick August back in the car, exactly the same time, exactly the same moon space, with a constable waving a mop saying, look, you can't see him, but he could see just enough. There was just enough outline.
Local papers carry reports of the reenactments and name the 2 witnesses. Rowena and her family suddenly realise not only is the killer still out there, but he now knows the names of the only witnesses.
I was convinced we were going to get shot any night, or somebody's going to jump the back fence and murder us all, keep us quiet.
Patrols are increased across Perth and undercover detectives roam the streets at night. The suspect, a gunman who could engage in a shootout in any place at any time. But then, the killer takes his terrible game to another level. 3 weeks after the shootings, at around 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning, at a house in inner city West Perth, a back door has been left unlocked. At either end, 2 young women are asleep in their bedrooms. A man enters and silently searches for valuables of any kind. Reaching the bedroom at the end of the hall, he sees 24 years old Lucy Madrill asleep. As the man moves towards her, he knocks over a framed photo and she wakes up. He lunges at her, and before she can scream, he pushes her onto the bed. Now on top of her, he wraps his hands around her neck and throttles her into unconsciousness. He takes the cord from a bedside lamp and wraps it around her neck. The cord pulls tighter and tighter, and he watches as the life slowly drains from Lucy's body. He then has sex with the dead body before dragging it outside onto a neighbouring lawn. Her body is again defiled with an empty whiskey bottle the killer finds lying on the lawn. The next day, neighbours find Lucy Madrill with the whiskey bottle cradled in her arms. Police are amazed by the cruel boldness of the killer, deliberately leaving his victim's body on public show.
Having committed the crime, a normal offender wants to put as much distance between the scene and themselves as possible. And having committed the crime, they would depart immediately. But he goes to the trouble of dragging the victim out of the house where there's a flatmate still asleep, and drags the body into the adjoining house, leaves it in the yard of the house. Just the thinking, the logic is beyond logic.
Other than the random nature of this attack, detectives have nothing to connect this latest murder to the recent shootings. News of the attack on Lucy Madrill increases the fear that's gripping Perth. Women lock their doors and windows and avoid going out at night alone, and everyone is a suspect. The man who was terrorising a city is now dubbed the Night Caller.
It was just so absurd. Nothing like that could happen in happy little Perth. Secure, safe little Perth. Just didn't happen that way. Perth was screaming for killer. We've got a shooter and we've got a strangler. The police were under more pressure, but not linking the two at all.
It's now August 1963, 6 months since Lucy's brutal killing. In a house in suburban Dalkeith, not far from Nedlands, where the Australia Day shootings took place, an 18-year-old student, Shirley McLeod, is babysitting. She's looking after the baby son of Carl and Wendy Dowd.
We were very appreciative that she was actually prepared to come and sit for us, because our regular girl wasn't able to. And she must have been a girlfriend, I think, of our regular sitter. She was just one of those lovely girls that you couldn't help but admire.
It's winter, and the babysitter sits in front of the heater, studying and listening to music. Quietly, an intruder enters the house. He makes his way towards the light at the top of the stairs. In the lounge room, he finds the young student asleep, exhausted after a night of study. He raises his newly stolen rifle and slowly takes aim, and fires a single shot, then disappears into the night. At 2 a.m, Carl Dowd and his wife arrive home.
I came up the stairs and I walked into the lounge, and my first impressions was that Shirley had gone to sleep. She was her head on the side, as though she'd gone to sleep on the couch. And when I got closer, of course, I saw that there'd been a bullet entered her head, in her forehead.
Although the bullet taken from Shirley McLeod doesn't match those of the earlier killings, police are sure it's the work of the same man. They also believe that the same man could be responsible for the strangulation murder of Lucy Madrill. At the MacLeod murder scene, an unidentified fingerprint is found. Unsure whether it's the killer's, they take the unprecedented step of fingerprinting everyone in the district.
When this fingerprint was found and it couldn't be identified, a considerable number of officers were detailed to visit every house in the Claremont, Nedlands, Dalkeith, Cottesloe area and ask the householders, anybody over the age of 14, I think it was, to volunteer a set of their fingerprints so they could be checked against this fingerprint.
Despite a mammoth effort, police fail to make a match. So far, all the luck has run the killer's way. And then, finally, a breakthrough. An elderly couple, out for an afternoon walk, stumble across a rifle hidden in bushes beside this road.
Oh, I'm just going to get some of those.
As she kneeled on the embankment to pick a sprig of gelatin wax, the rifle slid down onto her knee.
Look what's in here. Look what's there.
They notify police, who take the rifle away for ballistic tests.
It's unloaded. Perfect condition.
Test firing of that rifle proved it to be the rifle that had been used on the last victim, the university student. So finally they had a breakthrough, an absolutely miraculous one. I interviewed that lady in a nursing home 30 years later, aged 94. She said she'd never know to the day she died why she decided to pick a sprig of gelatin wax. She had a whole garden full of it.
Police replace the rifle exactly as it was found. Only this time, it's tied to the base of the bush with strong fishing line.
Make sure it's nice and tight.
Yeah, no worries, mate. It's done.
Okay, let's get out of here.
Okay.
Around the clock for 2 weeks, undercover police hide across the road, covered by foliage and tree branches, keeping the bush under surveillance. The trap is set. Now they wait, hoping the killer will return. After 4 people are murdered at random and 3 others wounded, police in Perth desperately need a break to catch the phantom who has been terrorising their city. That break comes a week after babysitter Shirley MacLeod's murder in August 1963, with the chance discovery of a rifle linked to her killing.
The police tied that rifle back under that bush, kept a vigil, a stakeout, watched it day and night.
Police wait patiently in their camouflaged hideout for 2 weeks. Finally, at 1:30 a.m. on the 1st of September 1963, a car pulls up. He scans the area and walks towards the rifle. As he reaches down and grabs the rifle, the detectives move in.
Police! What are you doing here, mate?
I was just taking a leak. Yeah, sure you were. Let's go.
A .22 bullet shell found in his car matches with one test fired from the rifle. The man is quickly identified, and even though they can't link him to all the killings, detectives have no doubt the night caller is finally behind bars. His name? Eric Edgar Cooke. Born in 1931, Eric Edgar Cooke is the eldest of 3 children of Vivian Thomas Cooke and his wife Christine. The boy has a prominent hair lip and cleft palate, a deformity that causes his father to despise him.
He was born to a violent alcoholic father who had to get married because he was expecting Cooke. He wasn't ready to be a father or to be a husband or to be the father of a deformed child.
Added to Eric Cooke's intolerable existence at home are the constant taunts he receives from the other boys at school, where he grew up a friendless loner.
So he had a miserable childhood at home and at school, and he grew up with a chip on his shoulder for the haves when he was a have-not.
After leaving school at 14, Cooke takes a job, and to avoid the constant violence at home, he spends more time outdoors, breaking into homes and flats.
He had no social life. He was ridiculed by his peers, so how he wanted to gain notoriety or become a person was to be able to spend money. So he stole to get more money than the 5 shillings his mother gave him as pocket money from his work.
In 1949, he's caught breaking into a house, and his fingerprints are linked to a series of burglaries. He then spends 3 months here in Fremantle Prison.
And I believe that from when we first caught him on fingerprints, I think that's when he started to wear gloves off and on.
At age 22, he meets and marries a 17-year-old waitress and devout Catholic named Sally Laven.
And he had 7 children. They had 7 children. But he was still a wanderer. His life of crime had settled in, really. And despite being given then a loving wife and a stable family life, everything that he'd lost, missed out on as a child, I think it was too ingrained by then. He still wanted more ego, more power. He still wanted to get back at society.
After his arrest, Eric Cooke is taken to the Perth CIB for questioning, and he's then charged with the murder of babysitter Shirley McLeod. The police case is strong, but they still have nothing to identify him as the night caller killer.
They had the rifle that had killed the last victim. They found a cartridge in the back of his car. It was clearly him. They had their man. He'd gone back from the rifle. He knew it was there. There was the cartridge. They had him.
Initially, Cooke will only admit to details of the Shirley McLeod murder and to burglaries and thefts. Finally, Detective Max Baker snaps.
Oh, and something come over me then, and I said, oh, no, I've had enough of this. So he was eating his curry and rice, and I suddenly said to him, Cookie, you're going to hang, you know. There's no doubt about it. Now, you've got a wife and kids. Think of them, and then think about whether you're going to be dragged to the gallows like a mongrel dog, or you're going to go there like a man. And within seconds he said, all right, Mr. Baker, what do you want to know? And did the old pen trick out of the top of my pocket.
Hello.
And I said, what I want to know, Eric, is did you shoot George Walmsley and the others that night? He said, yeah, it was me. He said, I'm the bloke you're looking for.
Once he knew he was really knew he was stuck with it, he confessed to those shootings, and he then confessed to all the crimes of his life. It took the police 3 weeks running him around Perth, taking him to places while he told them all the crimes he'd committed over the years.
Detectives are amazed as Cooke lists off a long series of horrendous crimes. He confesses to running down and injuring 7 women in the cars that he's stolen. The first hit-and-run victim was 26-year-old Nell Schneider. He ran her down at high speed as she rode her bicycle home in September 1958.
Well, the first thing I remember is waking up in a hospital and stay for another 2 weeks or 4 weeks altogether. And then coming home and also having to lie in the bed and getting 2 people who looked after me for a long time.
He said in his confession, I wanted to hurt somebody and she was it for the night. So he just sped up in this car he'd stolen, a Prefect, and just drove into the bicycle. Nell Schneider went over the roof, landed beside the road. The bicycle stuck to his grill. He drove around the corner. Finally, as he went around the corner, the bicycle fell off. and she was lying in a pool of blood.
Another victim was Glenys Peake, who was run down by Cooke in a suburban Perth street late at night, a year and a half later.
When I first looked around, I saw this car coming towards me. I tried to get out of the way. I kept thinking he's going to hit me. And as he hit me, I remember being thrown in the air and hitting the car. I don't remember hitting the ground, but I remember saying to myself, if I don't do something, he's going to come back. I knew he had to come back. And I was thinking to myself, he's going to come back and he's going to kill me. How's he going? He's just going to kill me, and I just had to get out of there. So I could remember crawling and stumbling through the lumberyard into the back pickets, which we'd taken apart. I can remember opening the back door and falling in. I can remember saying to my parents, I've broken my back, and the only next thing I can remember is in the ambulance and going to Royal Perth Hospital.
Investigators are surprised at Cooke's ability to recall each of his crimes in minute detail. He even shows detectives the exact spot where he disposed of the stolen rifle used in the Australia Day shootings.
He could remember how much he stole from somebody's purse. I stole a 10-shilling note and 2 shilling coins and 3 sixpences, and that would be exactly correct. The fine detail was just amazing.
He said, oh, I burgled that house down there. I said, oh, what did you do? And he said, well, I was here, he said, and I saw the car pull into the drive and the lights go on, and then the lights went on in the back. He said, so I walked down and had a look around, and then I walked straight through the front door. And I said, well, what did you see first up? He said, oh, the floor coverings, there's a painting on the wall, some flowers in the corner. So I walked through then into the kitchen, and I saw a wallet on one of the tabletops. He said, so the other, I knew they were out the back a bit more, and he said, so I grabbed the wallet and left.
One stage, the interrogating officers came out and directed me to look up the photographs of the murder in Midlands, where the young fella had been shot on the veranda, to specifically look for some clothes hanging on a line under the veranda. He told the investigators that he had deliberately folded them back on the line to facilitate his escape. I went through the photographs, and sure enough, there was one of our scientific photographs showing the clothes folded back.
After weeks of detailed confessions, police finally decide there's no point in documenting any more of Cooke's staggering life of crime.
They gave up. They finally gave up. There were so many break-ins, so many houses, that they gave up taking note of all those. But amongst hundreds of break-ins, hundreds of stolen cars, thousands probably, he confessed to 22 violent crimes.
He got a taste. Once these people get a taste for it, they've got to keep going. They just have to keep killing. And that's what he said. You just have to keep going. And he had to have the power to decide whether you lived or you died.
I knew he was stealing because he'd been caught for that quite often. He'd been caught for being a peeping Tom. He'd been caught for loitering. But I never suspected him of killing anybody.
Eric Cooke's many crimes put him among the worst criminals in Australian history. But then, Cooke confesses to more killings, for which 2 young men have already been convicted and jailed. One is the mutilation slaying of 21-year-old heiress Gillian Brewer. In 1959, Gillian Brewer is living alone in an apartment not far from Cottesloe Beach. Having stalked the attractive young woman over many nights, Cooke carefully chooses a time to attack. As usual, he steals his murder weapon, this time a hatchet, from a nearby house. He sneaks into the house. Cooke finds the young woman asleep in her bedroom. He slams the hatchet over and over again into his victim.
After attacking her many times with that hatchet, he stole a lemonade from her fridge, went out the back garden and drank a lemonade out in her back garden.
Not satisfied with chopping his victim to death, Cooke returns to Gillian Brewer's bedroom and repeatedly hacks at her butchered corpse with a pair of scissors. Police find the murder weapons at the crime scene. 18 months later, a 19-year-old deaf mute named Daryl Beamish is arrested and pleads guilty to minor sexual offences.
He was in the lockup waiting for his sentence in the afternoon, and the detectives of Perth said, "We've got a sexual pervert, he must have killed Gillian Brewer." And they held that 19-year-old teenager, with no parents, no help, no legal advice, they held him until they got a confession out of him to killing Gillian Brewer.
Daryl Beamish is convicted of murder and sent to prison for life. Cooke's other murder confession is the hit-and-run death of 17-year-old Rosemary Anderson in February 1963. Police believe that Anderson's boyfriend, John Button, was responsible, and he is taken in for interrogation.
It was my 19th birthday, and during the course of the evening an argument developed where Rosemary started walking home. I followed her down in my car trying to apologise. I let her walk out of sight up the other side of the railroad line in the dark for a while, and when I decided to try and find her again, I found her lying by the side of the road, lying in the sand about 4 metres off the edge of the road. A large wound in her forehead and blood profusely pouring out of it into a large pool of blood in the ground. So without thinking, I picked her up, rushed her off to a doctor's surgery that I knew would be open. I gave them a statement as best as I could as soon as I got back to the police station, but at that point they put that statement aside. They said, "We don't want that, we want a confession." And the whole attitude then really changed. Now, why did you do it? Why did you knock her down? Of course it was you.
He was traumatised, he was emotional, he was tired, he was scared. He went to the toilet to be sick, came back, he was beaten. He signed the statement they wanted.
My reasoning was, well, it doesn't really matter if I sign a confession because there isn't any evidence. I didn't knock Rosemary down, and therefore there's no evidence there. So once they realise that, they'll just have to tear the confession up.
Convicted of Rosemary's manslaughter, John Button is sentenced to 10 years imprisonment with hard labour. There's no acquittal for him or Beamish, although Cooke gives information that only the real killer could know. Authorities declare that Cooke is lying about the additional murders to prolong his trial. John Button and Daryl Beamish stay in jail. In a killing spree unprecedented in Australia's history, one man, Edgar Cooke, has taken out his hatred on the world by attacking and murdering innocent citizens. Over 4 years, his reign of terror has turned what was once a big, friendly community into a city of suspicion, where residents now live behind locked doors. For expediency, Cooke is tried for only one of his murders, that of the student, John Sturkey. At his trial, Cooke pleads not guilty on the grounds of insanity. But after deliberating for only an hour, the jury finds him guilty of murder, and he is sentenced to be hanged.
I went to court to see the proceedings, and I noticed how callous Cooke was. He seemed to have no feeling whatsoever. He was talking and joking and taking no interest in the court proceedings whatsoever. He was as though he was completely oblivious to what he had done, no remorse, a very, very callous character.
Cooke sits on death row at Fremantle Prison, awaiting his execution. He's finally taken responsibility for his terrible crimes and rejects the right to appeal. He says he's now ready to meet his maker.
The defence wanted a second mental opinion, which wasn't allowed by the Crown. They wanted to appeal that on such a capital case, a second psychiatric opinion should be allowed. But Cooke signed exactly the opposite. He signed an instruction, you are not to appeal my conviction. I murdered those people. I don't know why. I will pay my price to society.
He believes that by confessing to all his crimes, he will one day meet up with his family in heaven.
On the Sunday, he had his last real meal, a nice roast dinner. His wife came to visit him. He cried for a little while after and talked to the family. On the execution morning, he slept quite well that night, although the lights are left on all night in the condemned cell. That morning, he wakes at 6 o'clock and is showered, given a new set of clothes, and taken to the holding cells, which are just behind the gallows. Again, he was very calm.
John Button and Daryl Beamish were serving their sentence at Fremantle Prison.
There's a certain sense of respect in a prison when a prisoner is actually hanged.
Lord, hear my prayer.
People don't speak. People are very quiet, very subdued. Everyone is ushered out into the yard. People just sit there, they don't talk. They're very, very quiet.
I am like all others who are about to die.
Perth's nightmare will soon be over. The little man who took out his revenge on the society that rejected him is about to pay for his crimes.
Eric, is there anything you wish to say?
10 minutes before he's due to be executed, in the presence of the Reverend George Jenkins, Cooke again confesses to the 2 additional murders.
I swear by Almighty God.
Taking the Bible in his right hand, he says, I swear by Almighty God that I killed Rosemary Anderson and Gillian Brewer.
God have mercy on your soul.
After final prayers, he's led from his cell to the gallows.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses.
He's positioned over the trapdoor, below a hanging noose.
May God forgive you for your sins.
The chaplain prays and calls on God to forgive this sinner. The noose is tightened around the killer's neck, and a hood is placed over his head.
May God forgive you for your sins. May He have mercy upon your soul.
At 8 a.m. on October 26, 1964, Eric Edgar Cooke goes to the gallows here at Fremantle Prison to become the last man to be hanged in Western Australia. His body is buried in an unmarked grave on top of child serial killer Martha Rendell, who in 1909 was the last woman to be hanged in the state.
You never hear any noise from the actual gallows, and the gallows are just the other side of the wall to the main yard where we are. But on top of the roof of the gallows, you have the pigeons and seagulls. And the moment that that person is hanged and the trapdoor is opened, the seagulls and pigeons fly off in a great rush, and we know at that moment that a person has been hanged.
Behind him, Eric Cooke leaves untold misery for the families, loved ones, and friends of the people he killed and maimed, all because, as he said, I wanted to hurt someone. Of the night of the Australia Day shootings, he said, I had 55 bullets in that rifle. Isn't it lucky I didn't use the other 50? Before his hanging, Cooke had appeared as a witness at appeals by both John Button and Daryl Beamish, but acquittals on the basis of Cooke's confessions were rejected.
There were things that nobody else would have known, only the person that had killed Rosemary, but they still refused to believe him.
Button was paroled after serving 5 years of his 10-year sentence, and Darryl Beamish served 15 years. Eventually, after fighting for their innocence for more than 40 years, the authorities finally relented, and both men were officially pardoned.
And the judges said it was a gross miscarriage of justice, and it was most likely Cooke who had committed that crime.
Those two killings, along with the death of the lifesaver Brian Weir, who died several years after his shooting, took Eric Cooke's tally of murders to 8.
I think Eric summed it up himself. He didn't want an appeal against his sentence. He wanted to die. He believed he should die. He believed he was a monster.
Oh, he was obviously evil in that no one that just killed people the way that he killed them. And forget about just people he killed. There's all those women that he raped, brutally raped. The acts that were committed upon these young women. He was evil and deserved to die, without a shadow of a doubt.
He created such unhappiness for so many people, and for no good reason whatsoever, and he would never have ever have been a useful rehabilitated prisoner. He was just a nasty piece of work, and I think hanging him gave everybody a little bit of peace and closure.
To this day, those who lived through those terrible times when a murderer roamed their streets often warn their grandchildren to lock their windows at night, just in case Cookie comes.